talent is the most important thing. People are the most important thing. We often will invest in ideas that sound absolutely crazy and ridiculous. But if that founder is just so incredible and so magnetic, it makes you want to believe and hit the sort of I believe button that they're going to be able to actually attract the best talent to do this. I mean, I always think of the example of like Elon and SpaceX. Like he was able to hire all these people that had cushy graduate jobs. They worked at NASA, JPL, and some of the other prime companies working in space. And he got a bunch of these people to quit their jobs to work on this crazy company where Elon's pitch was, we're going to go to Mars.
Before we start the show, I'd like to ask you to please hit that subscribe or follow button. Your support is what fuels this podcast and provides the impetus to grow the show. It helps us book guests to tell their wild and funny career stories and also provide insight into the future of their industry. And here's the magic part. For every new subscriber we get, a unicorn is born somewhere in Australia, which means in the not too distant future, Netflix will be live streaming a unicorn versus kangaroo boxing match. If you want to see such a spectacle, please hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, please go ahead and rate this podcast too. I'm not saying you should rate it 5 stars, even though I think you should. But I am saying the number of stars you give this podcast should reflect the number of days in the work week. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Career Circus, the Story Night podcast that uncovers crazy career stories. Each week, we're joined by esteemed guests, champions from the realms of politics, commerce, governance, sports, and media, who recount stumbles, misunderstanding, and the lighter side of one's professional quest. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by venture capitalist David Ulevitch. David is a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, where he leads the firm's American dynamism practice, which invests in founders and enterprises that support U.S. national interests in aerospace, defense, public safety, education, and housing. Before joining Andreessen, he spent 13 years at Cisco, a company he joined after they bought OpenDNS, an enterprise security company he founded. David also sits on the Council on Global Competition and Innovation in D.C. and is on the board of trustees for Washington University in St. Louis, and he joins us now from New York City. David, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you've been at Andreessen for a while. You're a venture capitalist. To what extent did you go into VC because your last name contains the letters V and C?
That's funny. I actually never thought I was going to be an investor. I'll correct one thing on the bio. Cisco thinks I worked there for 13 years, but it's not actually true. Cisco counts the time that I built OpenDNS before they bought it as part of my long tenure at Cisco. So I was really only at Cisco for 3.5 years, and I built my company for 10 years almost before that. Cisco's official record is 13-something years, but the truth is it was really 10 years at my company, then we got bought, and then about 3.5 years at Cisco. But how I became a VC, I never thought I'd be a VC or an investor. I love being an entrepreneur. I love being an operator. I love building things. Actually, when I was coming up on passing my 3-year mark at Cisco, 2 things happened simultaneously, or maybe 3 things happened simultaneously. The first was that I was traveling basically every single week, often internationally. I was one of the youngest senior executives at the company. I probably was the youngest senior executive at the company. And so I would always get tapped on the shoulder to go on these trips like, hey, David, do you want to go to this conference in Indonesia? Do you want to go to Germany to this conference? We have a Cisco Live kickoff here. And it was really taking a toll on me. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was commuting to San Jose, and then I was on a plane basically every week, sometimes twice a week or 3 times a week. And so the travel toll really was weighing on me. I actually really enjoyed Cisco quite a bit. But there was sort of this, everyone always has this moment where there's like sort of a thing that's dragging you down. And then simultaneously, another venture capital firm, not Andreessen Horowitz, reached out to me to interview with them and thought I might be a good investor. And they simultaneously convinced me of 2 things at the same time. First, they convinced me that I might enjoy investing and spending time with entrepreneurs and helping them build their businesses. while simultaneously convincing me that I would not enjoy doing it with them. So I guess they succeeded in getting me interested, and then they failed, and maybe it was mutual, I don't know, but they failed to get me excited about working with them, and that's when I realized that every venture firm, even though the capital that we deploy as a commodity, we basically sell cash for equity. It's like the ultimate commodity business. We sell cash. While every venture firm basically does the same thing, the way that they do it is totally different. The culture that they have is totally different. The values that they have are totally different. And it really, they just operate in just totally fundamentally different ways, the way they make decisions, everything. And so that happened. And then the last thing that sort of happened simultaneously was that a guy named Jeff Stump, who runs the executive talent function at Andreessen Horowitz, he realized it was my 3-year anniversary at Cisco. He's a very smart executive recruiter. He said, hey, maybe David has like a 3-year commitment to Cisco. I actually only had a 2-year commitment, but he'd actually emailed me 2 years after I joined Cisco and said, hey, why don't you talk to us? I said, no, I like what I'm doing. He then put a little calendar reminder in for the 3rd-year anniversary, sent me an email and said, hey, what are you doing? We've always thought highly of you. And so I came in to spend some time with the partners at Andreessen Horowitz. I knew one of the other GPs of the firm, Alex Rampell, because he and I were in sort of like a CEO therapy support group thing when we were running our businesses. I knew Mark and Ben from when they started the firm. I'd actually pitched them my business. They didn't invest in the business. Maybe, they've made lots of great investments. They didn't make that one. It would have been good, but that's okay. But they were always so nice about it and very gracious, and I'd kept in touch with them. And so I spent basically a couple months in the end of the summer of 2018 with them. And by the end of the summer, I realized I wanted to be an investor, and I really wanted to do it at Andreessen Horowitz, a place that, and we'll talk more about it maybe, but a place that really is sort of built by entrepreneurs and run by entrepreneurs, and I fit in very nicely. And the pitch they made me was if I came here, I could do whatever I wanted, and I think I've largely lived up to that. I've done lots of things since I've been here.
So much to unpack there. I'm really fascinated by many elements of that. Firstly, you weren't considering VC. Somebody approached you, sold you on VC, but didn't sell you on them. What did they say to you that piqued your interest, but also deterred you from joining that enterprise?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer the second part first, which is that the thing that I didn't understand as an entrepreneur, and I pitched lots of venture firms, I got lots of rejections, I got lots of offers for investment. I never really knew how the sausage was made on the other side of the table when I was presenting my business to them. And what I learned was that every firm is totally different. Some firms have big investment committees where, a partner might get really excited about your business, might do a lot of work, and then present it to the investment committee, which you don't really get to interface with directly all the time. And the investment committee can just reject it for whatever reason they want. Maybe they're having a bad day that day. Maybe they made some other investments that aren't going well. Maybe they just didn't. Maybe they came in and heard you pitch the business once, and that's the only data point they have. And maybe you had a cough that day, and you didn't sound your best, or you didn't step with your best foot forward. So it doesn't really matter how much weeks of work and diligence and customer calls the other partner did if the investment committee just can sort of veto it and throw the boot on the deal. So that's how some firms make their decisions, and that didn't seem like a good place and a good environment for me. There's other firms where they have a big, they have on the outward facing side the appearance of a big team and a big firm, but really it's a bunch of like lone wolves that go and do their own deals, and they actually don't collaborate. They're not a team. It's sort of just like, six or 8 people just share an office, but other than that, they don't really work together. One partner does their own thing. They make their own decisions. They do their own work, and they're just kind of like, sharing an office. And I didn't want to be in that kind of an environment either. And when I met the team at Andreessen Horowitz, actually, one of the things they encouraged me to do, because I think they recognize that their approach to venture is so different. And this won't be a sales pitch for Andreessen Horowitz, I promise. But their approach is so different. They said, hey, you should go talk to some other firms. And so I did that. I had been, and I went and did it some more. And what I realized in Andreessen Horowitz was this idea that they wanted to build a firm that really supports entrepreneurs, especially post-investment. How do they help you build the best executive team possible and the best talent team possible so you have like the absolute all-stars on your team? How do you go and meet the most important customers and make sure that they become your customers? How do we help you sell and get introduced and open doors for you? And so we built out a whole platform. How do we make sure that you never run out of money and raise money? So we built a capital networks team at the firm. And so we had all these sort of parts of our platform. And I just thought, as an entrepreneur, I wanted all those things. So that, at the end of the summer, I was like, all right, I really like these people. Most of them are engineers and technical. And I like working with engineering folks and technical folks, especially ones who have then gone on to run companies. They were almost all entrepreneurs, and then they believed in the platform approach of really supporting entrepreneurs. Then I would say the last thing that I realized was that just from a value standpoint, they believe in the future. They're excited about technology. They don't just view themselves as financiers. And there's a lot of VCs that kind of sit behind their desk and put up their feet and just wait for the entrepreneurs to come to them. The problem is the best entrepreneurs don't do that. Lots of entrepreneurs will just come to you asking for money, but the best ones won't. You have to go out and find them, and you have to really sell them on why you're worth being in business with. And they just had a philosophy that really mapped to my own view of entrepreneurship, and so that's ultimately why I got excited about investing.
And so based on that philosophy, and earlier you touched upon, you've been given almost carte blanche to kind of do what you want at Andreessen. What have you done in terms of what are some of the investments that you're really proud of that have been home runs and some duds that you're like, oh, what was I thinking?
Any investor that only has great investments is maybe not taking enough risk and not betting in the future enough. I'll talk about a couple here, which is, when I joined the firm, my background was in enterprise software and cybersecurity. I knew that really well. So I made some enterprise software investments. About a little bit less than a year after I joined the firm, my partner, Mark Andreessen, asked me if I'd be interested in meeting with Palmer Luckey, who is the founder of a company called Anduril. He had previously been the founder of Oculus. He basically invented the VR category. He sold that company it was then called Facebook. Now it's called Meta, for like $3 billion. He'd made a bunch of money. But he wanted to build a defense company. And, I think Mark, I don't want to speak for Mark, but I think he felt like at the time, Silicon Valley was not so interested in defense. It certainly wasn't interested in hardware companies. Palmer had a lot of notoriety around his exit from Meta. And I think Mark wasn't so sure if the firm would have interest in working with Palmer again. Mark thought very highly of Palmer. This was like 2018, 2019, when you have to think back to that time when Google had withdrawn from something called Project Maven, which was a program to go help the Department of Defense software. So Silicon Valley, the idea of working with defense companies and investing in defense companies was just not in vogue. It wasn't cool. And in fact, I could go further and say that not only was it not cool or in vogue, but I think it was probably looked down upon. And so Mark sort of said, hey, would you be interested in talking to Palmer? I was actually very interested. When I worked at Cisco, I had the privilege of working with people in the federal government, working with people at the Pentagon and in the intelligence community who were all customers of Cisco. I really grew to love and respect the mission that those folks serve and thought they deserved the best technology. So I ended up meeting with Palmer. I went down, I met with the CEO, Brian Schimpf. I met with Trey, who was one of the co-founders, who actually also works at Founders Fund, another venture capital firm, and Matt Grimm, their COO. So I met the leadership team. They were exceptional. It was clear from the very beginning that they were exceptional. And this was for the Series B financing. And in short order, I decided to invest in that company. It was a fairly quick decision. I think we wrote a $30 million check. I ended up splitting the round with another firm called General Catalyst. The person who led that deal was named Catherine Boyle. I think she wanted to do the whole deal. I also wanted to do the whole deal. We ended up having to split it. And that was how we met. We didn't meet under the best circumstances. We were quite competitive. I'll preview that she's now my partner in the American Dynamism practice and fund. Ultimately, we joined forces. Andrew was probably the reason that we were able to start the entire American Dynamism practice. It was the first investment for me in the category. The firm had made other investments, but for me, it was really the first one. And because it was such a good one, the company has gone on now to grow substantially, raise billions of dollars, generate billions of dollars in contract value. It was really an extraordinary company, creating multiple products in the defense and public safety sector. But because I made such a good investment as my first investment in the category, that gave me the latitude to go and say, hey, we should do more of these and ultimately build a full practice. And we've now done that. We have a dedicated fund. We have a whole team, both on the go-to-market policy side as well as on the investing side. So that's one investment. It's a long answer. I'll make faster answers for some other investments. This is now fast forwarding a few years. Once we established the American Dynavision practice in 2021, I invested in a company called Flock Safety that works in the public safety space. They help catch criminals. They do that by often finding stolen vehicles. They have cameras that can identify vehicles and license plates and things like that. Started by an amazing entrepreneur. And that investment was also made at a controversial time. If you think back to 2021, it was still like the height of the Black Lives Matters movement in the United States. People were talking about defunding the police. And I said to myself, well, I don't know. I feel like the police deserve the best technology. And in fact, communities deserve the police to have the best technology so that policing can be the most objective. Nobody wants criminals in their neighborhood, but they also don't want the police, pulling over the wrong cars or making inaccurate stops for people. So we have a way to make sure that police pull over the correct car and not the wrong car. It'll make policing more objective. It'll catch more bad guys. It all made sense to me. The business was doing great. The founder he sort of has the personality of like a Boy Scout. I'm just a terrific person. And so I made that investment. And then since then, I've become a very large and significant public safety investor. I'm probably the largest public safety venture capital investor in the country. And we've invested in companies that support 911 services, drone first responder services, police investigations, et cetera. And so those are two investments, Flock Safety and Anduril, that I think really changed the trajectory of my career. I know you asked me about duds that I've invested in. I think rather than naming specific companies, I would rather just say that there's things I've learned. With any investment you make, you realize, about within 3 or 6 months if it's a regrettable investment or not. And it's almost always the same theme. I don't regret an investment if I invest in a category and the category doesn't work. If someone says, "Hey," then they're like the best founder in the world, and they say, I'm going to invent a time travel device. Well, it's like, well, I don't know if time travel is going to work or not work, but if they're the best entrepreneur in the world and they really try hard and they hire an incredible team and they're high integrity and they give it a real first-class effort, I don't think that's so regrettable. I mean, maybe time travel is a little bit of an extreme example. But if, on the other hand, the category works, but I pick the wrong entrepreneur and some other company does a better job, or I pick a category where there's a bunch of other companies, but the entrepreneur just can't hire a great team. They cannot attract great talent to come work for them, or they're terrible at managing money and they're constantly on the precipice of running out of money and they can't raise money. Those are the regrettable investments where their productivity is just very low. They don't get a lot of things done from month to month to month. They can't retain talent. They can't attract talent. They can't raise capital. They can't be a good fiduciary. So I've definitely made some of those bad investments. And, of course, hindsight is 2020. But I don't regret the ones where the founder did a first-class job and the company just didn't work. I mean, that happens. If I could tell the future, I would just buy lottery tickets instead.
Yeah, that's the nature of the business, right? Like, not every investment's going to work out, and that's what VC is. What I find really interesting about what you just shared is that you've really emphasized the people element over the idea element. And I'm wondering, is that just learned experience, or is it also influenced by the fact that you studied anthropology? Because one thing from reading around your bio, I was really fascinated by was how you attributed some of your success pre and as a VC to anthropology. And I think outside looking in, there's not like necessarily a straight line between those two things. So that ended up being thought-provoking. So is it fair to attribute some of what you just shared about the people side to your degree in anthropology?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe I'd broaden it even to just having like a broad liberal arts education, but I think anthropology was an excellent undergraduate degree because it's really about the study of people and culture. It gave me a great appreciation that, there's more than one way to do things. There's more than one way to win. People have different perspectives. They're not necessarily wrong, especially when it comes to, I remember thinking about my own company when we went international and started selling in Japan. The culture of sales in Japan is very different than the culture of selling in the United States. The culture of selling in Europe is very different than selling in the US. Even in different countries in Europe are just wildly different from each other. If you have a customer in the UK, it's very different than selling to a customer in France or in Germany. And the things they care about are different. And I think my degree in anthropology gave me an appreciation to just, first of all, expect differences And then second of all, appreciate those differences. And then third of all, be able to use those differences as an advantage as I was building my business. And then I think as an investor, I think an objective of a great investor, there's a bunch of different things that are important, but one of the sort of foundational things is to be open-minded. And I think an anthropology degree gave me this mentality that, it's worth learning more and exploring more and understanding more. Having an open mind is really important. To the point you made at the beginning of the question, talent is the most important thing. People are the most important thing. We often will invest in ideas that sound absolutely crazy and ridiculous, but if that founder is just so incredible and so magnetic, it makes you want to believe and hit the sort of I believe button that, yeah, they're going to be able to actually attract the greatest and best talent to do this. I mean, I always think of the example of like Elon and SpaceX. Like, he was able to hire all these people that had cushy graduate jobs. They worked at NASA, at JPL, at some of the other prime companies working in space. And he got a bunch of these people to quit their jobs to work on this crazy company where Elon's pitch was, we're going to go to Mars. I mean, it was a crazy pitch, but he was able to magnetically attract talent and then get them to work very, very hard on this mission. And then, of course, he was able to magnetically attract capital. He's been an incredible fundraiser. People always think Elon was just able to self-fund. Well, that was true for a little while, but it's not true forever. I mean, SpaceX has spent, tens of billions of dollars, and he had to be able to raise that money. And so I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the most important thing is the people. Without the people, you can't raise the money. Without raising the money and having the people, you can't build the products and build the company. So it always does come back to the people for me. And I do think the anthropology degree at least gave me that good foundation.
Yeah, and you mentioned on the people aspect, the power of belief, right? Elon has to believe in SpaceX to attract people. One other person I think is driven by the power of belief is, I'd say, Tom Brady. Drafted 9th, walks into the Patriots locker room around 2000, says to Bob Kraft, I'm going to be dead. A guy who's like number 9 on the depth chart. And the reason I mentioned Tom Brady is because it's related to a little pitch I have for you, which is I think we should try to commercialize Tom Brady's DNA, with his permission, of course, because his life is so perfect, right? He wins at everything. And he's so good looking. He wins all the championships. We should democratize such success. Is that a viable idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this idea of optimizing DNA is like a reasonable idea. It's going to have all kinds of ethical questions and things, but like, I have a little 6.5-month-old baby at home. And I know that, if my wife and I have another baby a year or two from now, there's probably going to be opportunities to say, if we don't do a natural birth, maybe we want to pick, do we have a boy or a girl? Well, if you can pick if you're going to have a boy or a girl, maybe you pick, do I have a tall baby or a less tall baby? Who's going to grow up to be tall or less tall? Do I want them to be smarter or less smart? Do I want them to be stronger or less strong? And so this idea of commercializing Tom Brady's DNA, like it sounds crazy, but it's actually not so crazy. We usually have influencers and celebrities, endorse products all the time. Why wouldn't they just endorse this DNA? Is that, it's either actually the DNA of Tom Brady or it's endorsed by Tom Brady because it's been optimized to mimic some of his traits and characteristics. So I think, sure. Is it an investment that I would personally do? Probably not. Is it an investment that somebody else would do? I could easily see somebody doing that. And I don't think it's as far-fetched. It's certainly not as far-fetched as time travel. So, maybe you should go pitch Tom Brady and see if he wants to do it. He did create a food company. I don't know the exact details, but he did have like some kind of a meal delivery service of like eat the same food Tom Brady eats. So like this is just sort of a natural extension of that.
Yeah, he's also invested in the soccer team from my hometown of Birmingham in England. Shortly after he invested, the team got relegated, went down a league. It's just fact. So, well, he knows about comeback. 28-3. We'll do that to you.
By the way, I've seen him in real life. I don't know him, but I've seen him. He is a huge person, and it's like he's tall, he's built, and he, of course, as you mentioned, he's handsome. But he is just a big guy.
When you say big, I imagine you mean physically big, or do you mean like big personality just kind of is a magnet?
Well, I don't know, maybe a little bit of both, but he just seemed physically big. Maybe it was just because he was wearing a big coat, but when I saw him, I was like, wow, I get why that guy is a professional football player. He's just a big guy. Like not fat big, but like big. Like he had broad shoulders. Like, yeah, he's huge.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned that you worked at OpenDNS for 10 years and Cisco bought your company 10 years. What was that like selling to Cisco? Was there a moment where you're like, this cannot be real? Or it felt very surreal, even though you're probably gunning for a sale? And after you made the sale, did you do anything crazy to celebrate or buy something that you like look back and think, what was I thinking?
Yeah. I mean, so when I sold the business, the company was sort of like a tale of two companies. The first 5 years, we tried to be a consumer business. It was very difficult. We made a little bit of money, but not a lot of money. We had an amazing product, but people just didn't really want to pay for it. We tried to monetize it with ads and things. We didn't like any of that. And so 5 years into building the business, we did a total reset, a total pivot, actually driven by some people that I hired who were very excited about this idea. And we basically had customers who weren't paying us money and said, hey, we will pay you money if you just charge us money because we think this is such a great product, but we're not really a consumer audience. We're big companies. We need to pay you and have a support agreement and contract. So the second 5 years of the company really became an enterprise cybersecurity company and grew very quickly. But when you added it all up, it had been 10 years and there was a lot of fatigue. I had a lot of fatigue in the business. A lot of the other people that had been there a long time were fatigued. And when Cisco came to buy us, it was a huge windfall. It gave me enough money to never have to work again. It created 36 millionaires in the company. It was a great return for our investors. And so at the time that we sold, it felt really, really good. I think in hindsight, and while I wouldn't say that I have regrets about it, in hindsight, if I realized just how good the company was, and I don't think I had a full appreciation for just how special the product was at that point. The timing we had in the market as the whole world was moving to cloud and mobile devices, our service was really well suited for it. I think if I had realized all those things, it's clear to me we would have built a much, much larger company before we sold. So I was mentally and emotionally, I think, ready to sell, but practically, I probably should have waited a few years. That said, I don't really have any regrets. It was life-changing for me and for many other people. And Cisco was actually a great home for the company. The company's gone on inside of Cisco to do incredibly well. It does many, many hundreds of millions of dollars a year in sales. It's tied into all their other products. A lot of members of the team are actually still there now, 7 years later. 7 years after I left, 10 years after the acquisition. And the acquisition was in 2015. So I'm very proud of how it all went. And then in terms of buying anything special, I remember actually telling my whole team, we had about 300 people in the company, and I told them right after we announced the sale, I said, the only piece of advice I've been given is that, you should not go out and buy a giraffe. Some people, sort of chuckled when I said that. I said, but that's a metaphor. Nobody needs a giraffe. Everybody wants a giraffe, but nobody needs a giraffe. And if you buy a giraffe, it's going to be cool for like a day, but then it's going to be a huge pain. And then you're going to realize, wait, now I have this giraffe and it costs a lot of money. And so I really tried for the first year to not really spend any of the money that I got from Cisco, to just sort of let myself get comfortable having a significant amount of money. But I did, and actually I lived in a rent-controlled apartment in San Francisco, which I kept for many years after the sale because I was sort of too focused on work and some other things to do anything about it. Sold the company in 2015. In 2016, I did buy a piece of land in Montana to build my dream ski house, which I eventually got around to doing, and I started construction of that in 2018. The only crazy thing I really did was I think I built probably one of the most incredible ski houses in the world, maybe in America for sure. But I waited a couple of years. I started that in 2018. And I sold the company in 2015. I was fairly pragmatic, and even today, I think I live outside of that house, the ski house I built. I live a relatively modest life.
And that's delayed gratification, right? Because you didn't construct that immediately. Has that been featured on Architectural Digest yet?
It hasn't. We've thought about it, but we have not. We've kept it mostly just for me and my friends and family to use. We have not shared it so publicly.
Have you had any interesting, unusual guests? Because I know Montana is a very popular place for folks in media and tech to buy homes.
Well, I have a lot of very, very famous neighbors. I do have that, but I don't know. I like to host my partners from work for offsites, so we can all spend time together. So I think Mark Andreessen's famous, so he's a good house guest.
We'll have more from this interview right after this quick break. OpenAI is paying around $400,000 per year for someone to work on storytelling and communications, because they know in a world awash in AI-generated content, authentic storytelling is needed to cut through the noise and convert hearts and minds. Don't take my word for it. Listen to investor and entrepreneur Keith Richman, who posted about the ability to connect with people through narrative. AI can generate infinite amounts of content, but cannot create genuine human connection. It can mimic tone and style, but cannot share real experiences or build an authentic community. The better AI gets at producing content, the more valuable human perspective becomes. Now, you may not have $400K to invest in comms if you're an executive trying to position yourself as a thought leader, or an athlete trying to reinvent yourself for a post-playing career, or a startup trying to gain investment. But you don't need that kind of budget. What you need is Story Night, an independent strategic comms firm that applies the talents of award-winning Hollywood writers to your communications and marketing. Story Night will help you leverage talent that has written for hit shows on Netflix, Disney+, NBC, CBS, and more to write your newsletter, speeches, memoirs, decks, and more. To learn more, visit the Story Night website at story-night.com. And now, back to the show. Now, one thing you mentioned is your time at Cisco, and now you are leading Andreessen's American Dynamism practice, which is all about investing in core national interest. One thing that I think Cisco was a pioneer of, but less so since the emergence of Huawei, is networking equipment. I imagine that means that you've got really good insight into the investments America needs to make to compete with Huawei, and not just compete, but compete with the next Huawei that's coming down the road from China. Has that experience at Cisco, at OpenDNS, governed how you approach investing at Andreessen at all?
Totally. I think my experience at Cisco in particular, both working with customers in the federal government, at the Pentagon, and the intelligence community, gave me both awareness of how they deserve the best capabilities and technologies to protect the men and women who serve our country. And I'm a believer that, deterrence is the best defense, which means we need to have the sharpest sword against our adversaries so that we never get into conflicts, or that when we are in conflicts, we have the ability to do so as precisely and quickly as possible to get out of these things. So when I was doing that, and when I was at Cisco, the other thing I got exposure to was just how competitive a company like Huawei was, and how kind of, I would say, even unfairly competitive they were. For instance, we would be in contracts where we were trying to win major multi-$100 million contracts, for instance, in Europe, to do like a cellular refresh or a networking refresh. And Huawei would be able to come in with a similar bid, similar cost as maybe Cisco would come in with, but would be able to offer things like, 40 years interest-free financing powered by the Bank of China, something that Cisco couldn't do. And so from a competitive standpoint, they have these unfair advantages. And from a technology standpoint, people like to rip on Chinese companies all the time and say, oh, they're copycats, they steal intellectual property. Well, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe that was true, but there certainly became a point in the last 15, 20 years where that stopped being, at least maybe it stopped being entirely true, or it didn't really matter, because they became very good at technology and innovating technology and creating new technology. And, Huawei has innovations now all the time that we actually don't have here in the US or in Europe. And they became so formidable. The other thing that has happened is that we now have a better approach. So there are, but it doesn't really matter that Huawei is a competitor to American companies. That's not such a big problem. But Huawei is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and they operate a surveillance state inside their country. And they would extend that surveillance state outside their country to the extent they can. And so that matters for American interests. That matters for American privacy. And the other thing that matters is that what we've increasingly seen is that American companies have stopped doing things in our supply chain that we need to do our own manufacturing and building. Let's say we want to have a great drone business. Well, you need to put motors inside of drones. And where do motors come from? Well, motors come from China. Okay, well, what goes in the motors? Well, magnets go in the motors and copper goes in the motors and all these things. Okay, well, where do the magnets come from? Where does the copper come from? Well, increasingly, it all comes from China because these as you sort of shift left in the manufacturing process and the supply chain for everything that we use, whether it's in defense or aerospace or healthcare, a lot of the precursor required ingredients are increasingly coming from China because it's easier to manufacture there, it's easier to refine there. They don't have the same environmental regulatory regime that we have here. They don't have the same labor protections that we have here. And so for a whole variety, and they're very good at production and manufacturing and metal work and all these other things. So for a whole variety of reasons across a tremendous number of industries, things have basically been outsourced to China. So not only has it given rise to companies like Huawei and DJI that are these national champion companies that we have to compete with commercially, but all the things underneath that are extremely important to Western manufacturing, Western supply chains. And so I include Europe and the United States and all of our allies in that. And what we've discovered is that basically we have a complete and total dependence on China. So when we think about it, there's a long answer, but when we think about the investments we make, of course we love investing in the Andurils of the world, the Ceronics of the world, the Castellians of the world, the Flock Safeties of the world, all these cool companies. But we're increasingly shifting left with our focus and looking at mining and minerals companies. Can we find companies that are using software to improve the process of mining and mineral extraction so that we have a domestic supply of critical minerals, whether it's lithium or copper or nickel or cobalt or whatever the case may be? We're looking at supply chain manufacturing companies, chemical companies, explosive manufacturing companies, because a lot of the precursors needed for explosives also come from China. And if we were ultimately in a conflict in that region, we might not be able to get all the ingredients we need to actually defend ourselves. So I do spend a lot of time thinking about it. I spend basically all my time thinking about it, is the short answer.
And we saw that, right? Your theory is borne out by evidence where during COVID,
yeah,
where China was very quick to act and the US is at the mercy of these global supply chains. My sense is that this current administration is really trying to address this issue head on. There was an interview in the New York Times that the interview subject, I'm forgetting his name, but he essentially said, China's run by engineers and America's run by lawyers. You may have seen this interview, which kind of rings true from what I can tell. Do you feel that to really compete with China and reshore and bring manufacturing up and down the supply chain back to America, we're going to need a lot of change from a national psyche, from governance point of view to, I'm not saying copy China, I'm not saying model ourselves after the Chinese, but I'm saying maybe learn a bit more from their approach to the national interest?
I think that, so yes, and we have in this country, there's just an incredible level of divisiveness, political sniping, lack of collaboration, and I would say an inability to focus on the root causes and core issues across a tremendous number of real risks, I think, to the country. And you could tie that in not just to manufacturing and defense, but healthcare issues, obesity epidemic, you name it. That said, I think that we saw this again in COVID. Yes, we saw the supply chain issues and the interruptions there, and that was a huge wake-up call. But we also saw the resourcefulness and ingenuity and intellectual capability of the United States. We had 3 COVID vaccines in very quick order. All the government had to do was guarantee. It was like the government basically said, if you build it, we will buy it. They guaranteed orders. They put sort of capital. They used capitalism at its very best. And the result was we had 3 working vaccines, whereas China really didn't have anything. They had to go to full autocracy mode, full lockdowns and things like that. So I think we were able to demonstrate the benefits of our system in moments that matter. I think the challenge is, how do we create, I don't want to say create a crisis, but how do we create a moment that matters like we did during COVID at a time that doesn't feel as acutely like a crisis? The obesity epidemic is an epidemic. The drug addiction issues in this country are epidemics. Our defense industrial base needs massive revitalization. Our resilience in the supply chain on China is a massive crisis. Our inability to manufacture things at scale and at speed is a crisis. How do we turn those things into action? And how do we do it in a way that brings along, our allies? And not everything needs to be solved in the United States. We have, you can call it, some people call it onshoring, but I can call it friendshoring, nearshoring. That there are countries in Europe that are just excellent at chemicals, excellent at manufacturing. How do we leverage our relationships and our friends to revitalize their own industries that they've allowed to atrophy because we all kind of got lazy and leaned on China for these commodity ingredients and needs. And so I think that the thing we can learn from China, they are very good at setting a top-down strategic plan. I think that is one of the things that the United States is the worst at. Like there is no CTO sort of plan for the United States. There is no chief mineral officer for the United States that this is our critical minerals plan. There is no energy plan that says, how do we create 5 times the energy in this country so that we can satisfy our insatiable thirst for whether it's AI compute or electric vehicles or batteries? How do we make a full transition to clean energy? We're very, very bad at these top-down strategic, especially technical plans and programs. And those are things that we work on. But yes, it does require major change. It requires leadership change. We need better people to run for office than we currently have. I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around at all the people running for office and the choices we have in our candidates. People get so mad of like, how could you vote for this person instead of this person? Well, it's like, they're both terrible. We're basically, and this is not just in the United States, this is in countries happening all over the world as people sort of like, revert to, a much more divisive environment to populism and things like that. Like, it's like, they're both terrible. How did we end up in a place where nobody good is running for office? And so I think we need to, that requires changing, I think the language we use to talk about politics, the language we talk about when it comes to regulation, to elections. And so, and I think the media has a role to play in that. I think a lot of, the media has become very, very biased to one side or the other. I know some people think that like the media is entirely one-sided on this side or on this side. Depending on who you ask, they think the media is entirely on the other side, right? I think it's actually just the media is just incredible. They believe that they're activists often. And I don't think that serves anyone's interests. And so we need lots of changes. We need regulatory changes. We need better candidates in office. We need the media to be more reasonable. We need people to seek middle ground and not divisiveness. Then obviously we need large, I think, top-down technical programs that can be widely deployed and adopted.
Yeah, agreed on all of those. The point you made on poor candidates not just being an American issue, I can tell you as a British citizen and as an American citizen how true that is. Last election was like, wait, who am I voting for? These are all terrible candidates. But speaking of governance and Washington, you sit on the Council for Global Competition and Innovation. Based on your experience there and working with the Pentagon and the intelligence community, what is in Pete Hegseth's drink?
Well, he's very fit because he came out this morning and said that every general and on down is going to have to do a physical fitness test twice a year now to be in the military. All the rank and file members of the military have to stay in good health and shape. That doesn't apply to all the generals. Some of them are in good shape, but not all of them. So he said this morning, that they all have to pass a PT test. I guess I'm giving away when we're recording this by saying that. So what is in his drink? He has a background of coming from, he was on television, so he's very good in front of the camera. I think that the rank and file troops love him. He recognizes that the Department of War needs to transform itself, both in the composition of the people in the military as well as the technology and capabilities that they have. Whether or not he can do that remains to be seen, but I think he is a voice for change. He is actively pushing change. He's assembled a tremendous team. I recently saw last week in Washington, I saw Emil Michaels, the Undersecretary of War, who focuses on advanced technology and research and development. And this is someone who's just an incredibly capable person who's decided to join Secretary Hegseth and support our country. So he's assembled a great team. There's a bunch of other people around him that are really good. And so I'm very bullish. I'm very excited about the direction he's pushing things. I know I guess one thing is he speaks very directly and speaks his mind. I think that that can get people in hot water, but I'd rather somebody get a lot of things done, advance our country's interests, advance our military capabilities, and I can deal with them, if they say something that riles some people up from time to time. By the way, nobody's better at riling people up with the things they say than his boss. So I think he's in good company, right?
Well, it's almost like it's a reward when you work for the president. If you consider your time at OpenDNS, at Cisco, your time at Andreessen, What would you say is the moral of the story?
A friend of mine had me talk to their son recently who was applying to colleges, and the parent wanted me to explain some complicated chess game of if you go to this school, then you can go to this graduate school, and then you can join this company and do this, which is not what I believe at all. I think life is really much more like checkers than chess, and I think that the people that overly fixate on the move that's happening 4 moves away from now lose sight of making the best decision in the moment that they're in, because you have to play the game as it lays on the field. And I think if I look at my career, I never thought I'd be a VC or investor. I never thought I would be, the largest public safety investor. I never thought I'd be doing all this work in Washington. I never, and there's a lot of things I never could have predicted or expected. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. But at each stage of the decision-making process, I just made the decision based on what felt like the right decision at that time. And I think that's the best way. And by the way, this parent who had me talk to their son is very unhappy with everything I said. I said, you should go to a college that you think you're going to have the best time at, and you'll do well. But I think every school you can get a great education at. You don't have to go to the number 1 school or the number 2 school. Your life will not fall apart if you go to the number 10 school or the number 50 school or the number 100 school. And you should just go to the school that you think actually has students that you're going to want to spend time with, teachers you're going to want to learn from, areas of study that you think are going to be interesting. And, if you think you want to be pre-law, let's say you want to be pre-med, I never wanted to be pre-med, but my dad's a scientist. And so it was like something I considered for a second. And then I realized wait, that's really hard. I don't want to do that. And I also don't want to be a doctor. You have to do the things you want. And in my career, I've always tried to make the decisions that I felt like were the best in that moment. So when I sold my company to Cisco, then wanted to be, I was so proud of the company I built, but I wanted to be really proud of the work I did at Cisco. And I told my team, look, we should be proud of what we did, but I want to be proud of the work I did at Cisco. And when I was done with Cisco, I felt really proud of what we had achieved. And then I came into Andreessen Horowitz and said, look, time is my most valuable currency. I want to be proud of the work that I do here. So I work really hard. I love the work that I do. And I'm very proud of the work that we do and that my partners and I spend time on. And so I've always just tried to make the decisions that matter in the moment. I've tried to always do a really, really first class and really, really good job at all the things that I do. And I've done lots of controversial things, which fortunately in retrospect, like the Andrew investment, like flock safety investment, they don't end up looking so controversial in hindsight and in retrospect. You got to do what you think is right. You got to make the decisions at the time that feel that's right. And I've always, I'd say I've always played checkers, not chess.
I love that because so often we're taught about emphasizing chess, not checkers, especially, with the current political situations, like, oh, Trump's playing 4D chess is a common analogy. So I find you challenging that kind of approach to be refreshing. Final question. Based on the investments you're making, if you were to write the story of what the country will look like 5 years from now, what kind of story would you write?
I think we're on the verge of entering a robotics era that people can't fully even appreciate. I think people now fully understand that we're going to have self-driving cars. We're right on the cusp of it. If you go to San Francisco, you can get into a Waymo. It's a much better experience. It's just okay, this will obviously be everywhere. Maybe not 100% deployed. Maybe some people will still drive, but 5 years from now, most people I think will just have a self-driving car. I'm sort of at that conclusion. I think robotics are going to be the same way. I think it's a lot closer than people realize. And I mean sort of humanoid kind of robots doing a lot of robotic work. I think we're going to have lights out factories that have no workers. And I think that it won't necessarily be a collapse of jobs. I think new jobs will be created that really capitalize on this. The same way that anytime any other technological revolution we've had has actually created more jobs, more economic output, more GDP growth. And I think a lot of these things are much closer than we realize. I think that the world continues to fragment, and that's unlikely to change. It's my sincere hope that we don't have any large-scale conflicts beyond what we already have going on. I hope that Ukraine gets settled. I hope the situation in the Middle East starts to calm down. I think we're very close. I think the world has almost no appetite for a global conflict, actually. That's not always been the case from a societal standpoint, but I think the appetite amongst sort of Gen Alpha and Gen Z people and millennials there's basically no appetite for conflict. That could change, but I don't think so. But I think that we need to make sure that if there is a conflict, we are best prepared to defend ourselves and not have something drawn out and painful. And let's see, what else do I think 5 years from now? I mean, we're in this AI era that's just transformative. I mean, I now use ChatGPT or another large language model dozens of times a day, the same way I used to use Google. And I think it's going to become a much more natural motion for people as we go on. And it's just incredible how fast you can now, like I've always been an information assimilation kind of machine. And I think ChatGPT just makes it even easier. Someone sent me like a 90-page PDF the other day. I put it in ChatGPT and I said, I want a 5-page summary. I don't want the 5-paragraph summary. I want a 5-page summary. And it read this whole 90-page PDF and gave me a 5-page summary, and it was incredible.
Yeah, that stuff works.
I'm excited for the future. I think the next 5 years are going to be awesome. I would love to see less divisiveness, but I'm not holding my breath for it.
Well, there's one way to change that, and that's David Ulevitch runs for Congress, maybe.
It's possible. Not impossible. Seems unlikely, but not impossible.
Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago that time is your most valuable currency. I'd like to very much thank you for spending your time with us today. I've really enjoyed learning so much about your journey in as an entrepreneur and as an investor. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to The Career Circus. To get a breakdown of exactly why David's stories were so compelling, check out the Deconstructing the Saga newsletter at storynight.substack.com.